everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Danielle Daw, Adult Services Librarian at the Halton Hills Public Library. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's presentation of the Halton Hills Lecture Series. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather tonight is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also want to thank CFUW-Georgetown and the Friends of the Halton Hills Public Library for their support of the Halton Hills Lecture Series. Tonight we have a special event run in partnership with CFUW-Georgetown to recognize International Women's Day. Those of you in the audience will notice that CFUW members are wearing purple tonight and will be participating in the Choose to Challenge hashtag on social media for International Women's Day. We are also recording tonight's lecture and will make it available through the library's YouTube channel next week. Two housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have a question during tonight's presentation, please pop it into the chat box. And I'd also like to remind everyone that CFUW's business meeting will follow the lecture. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Natalie Romero is an HR professional by day and a freelance writer and blogger by night. She joins us for an exploration of what parenting looks like today, including the impacts of COVID-19 and her own personal experience in juggling the acts of modern parenthood. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Natalie.
Hello, everyone. I am going to take just a second to share my screen. We all see it?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So, thanks again for having me tonight. Let's see if, there we go. So we have a little bit of an introduction already. I have a degree in Spanish language and literature from York University. And I do have a postgrad in HR management from Sheridan College. I have two children. I'm a mother of two. My kids are 10 and 12. I work full-time in HR for a tech company. I've been with a tech company for a few years now. Previously, I'd worked in very traditional organizations, manufacturing, spent a lot of time in consulting. And then I'm also a freelance writer. So I'm working essentially two jobs and raising a family right now. You can find my work in places like CBC, Huffington Post, a website called YMC, Savvy Mom, amongst other places. I tend to focus my writing or my articles on kind of parenting related, lifestyle related. I speak a lot about working parents. I'm trying to kind of shift the narrative of working mother and refer to myself as a working parent because nobody ever calls a working father a working father. So I'm trying to shift that narrative a little bit. So if you're ever interested in reading some of my things, you can find them on those types of websites. So let's talk a little bit about motherhood today. I think motherhood evolves over time. That's the world evolves over time. Motherhood is also evolved. So we'll talk a bit about kind of modern parenting and what motherhood looks like and some of the challenges that we face today. This stat here is from the StatsCan website. So one of the things that I think should be called out is the fact that families often look a little bit different today than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. From the StatsCan website, you'll see in 2016, if you look at the numbers kind of fertility of folks having children, the highest numbers are kind of between 25 to 40, with really the highest numbers focusing on the 30s. And I'd argue that in today's day, you would probably see that really, really heavily focused on 30s and even more going into the 40s at this point. A lot of folks are having children a little bit later, and families look a little bit different. Folks are starting to have families later for multiple reasons, whether they're kind of focusing on career and education and in their early years. That's a big part of it. I think kind of establishing yourself in the world takes a little bit longer today. So we're finding more and more families are deciding to hold off and have children a little bit later. blended families, divorces, blended families are also kind of what we see today. We don't really look at divorce as, historically we've referred to as divorce as a broken home, and we don't really refer to that anymore. It's kind of co-parenting has become like an active process. Um, and I think families really try to put children first in those environments as opposed to looking at it where, 10, 20 years ago, divorce was kind of looked at as a broken family. And we don't really see that as much anymore. And the other thing that I think makes families look a little bit different today is we struggle a bit with less community or family support, and for multiple reasons. If you think a lot of families live far away from their children, a lot of children, I guess, live far away from their parents in today's day. We're geographically spread out across the world. I'm sure we can all look into our own families and know that we've got people kind of spread about which influences having that family support. And another part to that is, oftentimes when we hit kind of those early childbearing years, or when we have young families, we can look back and say our parents they're not retired, they're still working, they don't necessarily have the ability to support on a day-to-day basis the same way. So I think that influences kind of the way we function as a family now, and we tend to have to kind of fend for ourselves in that realm. There's a little lag when I hit next, so let's see if it goes. And it is not. Oh, there we go. We live in a world of information overload. Information is constantly being thrown at us in all realms. As a new parent, that is extremely overwhelming. There are definitely really, really good parts of having all of this information at our hands. It helps us not feel as alone when we're struggling as parents. When you can go online and meet other, mothers who are struggling with the same things, you can Google how to put your baby to sleep. You can Google, what does it mean when this happens? I have Googled the absolute strangest things that I would never think I could find answers to, but I have found the answers that way. So it's definitely a really good thing. It's a positive thing to have that information, but it's also thrown at us in an abundance, and it's really hard to decipher through that, and it can cause a lot of anxiety. If you think that this information is thrown at us before we even get pregnant, there are blog posts and articles and forums telling us the best way to conceive, how to conceive, when you should conceive, how to conceive a boy versus a girl, how to know you're pregnant, what to expect when you're pregnant. I mean, you go through all of that stuff, and that is really overwhelming in a time that's a little bit overwhelming as is. The hard part about it too is that information is rapidly changing. I think back to, my kids, like I said, are 10 and 12. And I think back to when my kids were born and having conversations with my own mother. I was 30 when I had my son. So my mother's first experience with the baby had been 30 years before. And I remember her feeling overwhelmed with how much the guidance had changed from when she had us. Things like how you put your baby to sleep. So, she was, when I was a baby, the recommendation was to put babies to sleep on their tummy. And when I had my son, that was it was the scary thing. Don't put babies to sleep on your tummy. It's always the back to sleep campaign was a really big thing then, to have babies sleep on their backs. And it was overwhelming because I felt like, can I go to my mother, that was my instinct, was to go to my mother to get some of that information and that guidance. And we didn't always know if we had the same information or the right information. So it was really, it was really overwhelming. When you think about the fact that there's so much pressure today to tell us that there's one right way. So we are spending an abundance of time online trying to find that one right way to do things. We're constantly hearing these bombarding messages, as I said before, with the Back to Sleep campaign. And there's these messages of all of the things that you should not do. Don't put your babies to sleep on the back. Don't feed them. Actually, this has changed. When I had my son, it was don't feed your child peanuts before they turn the age of 2. And now that's actually changed. And they tell you to expose your child to peanuts a little bit earlier. It's really exhausting and mentally draining to try to wade through all that information and find what is the right thing to do. What I think it can do sometimes too is to take away or guide us away from following our own instincts as a mother. I know when I had my son, who's my oldest, I was searching for what I was supposed to do. And I remember sitting back one day and thinking, there's a voice inside me telling me what I should do, and I need to listen to that, because there's something, biologically that tells us how to raise our children in a certain way. And it can be difficult to lose that. And when you're constantly kind of searching through this information and to find the right way to do things, you can definitely start to ignore that inner voice. There were times that I did ignore guidance that I received from doctors even, because my inner voice told me that that's not what I wanted to do. My son, who's 12, is a sick kid's kid. So he was born with some health issues, and he spent a significant amount of time in hospital. I've written a lot about that experience and the trauma that caused me, to try to work through that. But being involved in the medical community and from that perspective, and specifically sick kids, that's a world-renowned hospital and has experts that are brilliant and amazing at what they do, it can be really difficult to take something that, this high-profile doctor has told you and said, I don't know if that's how I should do things. So it can be mentally and emotionally draining as a mother right now to have all of that information thrown at you. And even in the last decade, since my children were babies, I think about how things have changed and the access to information has changed even since then. 12 years ago when I was pregnant, I didn't have a smartphone. So when I wanted to look something up, I had to sit down at a computer and go online and look it up. Moms can literally look it up on the toilet if they want to. So it is everywhere, all over, and you can't escape it. So sometimes it's a matter of putting some boundaries around it to help you through that. Apologize for the little awkward silence while I switch slides. Is it going? Is it going? While we wait for this to switch, what I can start by saying is I've written quite a bit about questioning myself and other parents surrounding if we are making parenting harder than it has to be. With all of this information, it's not changing, is it? Oh, there it goes. I often wonder if we are making parenting harder than it has to be. Like I said, I've written a lot about this. There's so many ways that you can look at this area. One thing that I think about is a big presence in today's day, something that I didn't have 12 years ago, really, when I was having my kids, or it wasn't as prevalent as it is today, is social media. Social media really, truly presents a false narrative of what our lives as parents actually looks like. And it does that. Even the knowledge of knowing that it presents a false narrative does not stop us from comparing ourselves to everybody that we see. Social media, when we look at other people's social media feeds, whether that be Instagram, photos on Facebook, what people are choosing to put out there about their lives, we often look at that and think everyone else has it all figured out. And I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm supposed to have it all figured out because all of those people over there know what they're doing. We're looking at folks, you know, they're carefully curating the images that they put online. We see images of these perfectly coordinated children with perfectly clean homes. They're making these amazing dinners. I think even about some of the photos I've seen of lunch boxes and things, and I think, I'm sending like a packaged granola bar, and maybe I should be making everything from scratch because all the other moms are making everything from scratch, and that can be really, really overwhelming. What we're not seeing on social media is the chaos of a Wednesday morning when we're all trying to get out on the door on time and everybody's trying to zip up toddlers' coats and people are crying and milk has been spilled and someone yells and dishes are filled with dirty sinks because nobody ever puts photos of their sink filled with dirty dishes and on Instagram. That's not what we see. So we feel like when I come home, I mean, now I'm working from home, but when I would come home from work and see that I had a sink full of dishes, I'd feel so deflated. And why can't I get this? Why can't I figure this out? Because everybody else seems to do that. The other thing I wonder sometimes is, are we too involved? Can we be too involved? There is a pressure out there to constantly be involved in children's every waking minute. So I've put a link in here. I think we share the slides after, but if not, I can provide that information. But I always, this is actually something from one of the articles that I wrote, where I said, if you scroll through Instagram, you'll see it in the photos of day trips, invitations to play, and carefully coordinated play dates. Parents everywhere are arranging their children's childhood for them. I don't know if you folks know what an invitation to play is, but that's a whole world on Instagram where parents, and I'm actually going to say mothers because it's almost always mothers, will set up a table that looks beautiful and that's supposed to be an invitation for their children to come from school or come from wherever they are to play. So it might be, color coordinated artwork perfectly laid out so that they know how to cut their shapes out and do all of these things. And it makes us think, like, I'm not doing that. And should I be? And are my kids going to fall behind because I'm not setting up invitations to play and I'm just letting them figure it out for themselves? I'm going to be honest. I'm in my 40s. I don't remember my parents getting down on the floor and playing with me. Like, I don't remember that ever happening. And that doesn't mean my parents didn't do things with me, because they did. And we traveled together and we had fun days out at parks and zoos and all of those things. But when we were home, we entertained ourselves. We played with siblings. We played outside with neighborhood kids. My parents just didn't do that. But today we're expected to do that. We're expected to play with our kids all of the time. We're expected to organize game nights and movie nights. And we're doing all this stuff while we're working, and while we're expected to make homemade healthy meals, and while we're expected to have magazine ready homes that are perfectly cleaned. And it's just impossible. And we're putting this impossible pressure on ourselves because it's not doable. So I try my very best to remember that, and remember that it doesn't have to be this complicated and it doesn't have to be this hard. Another thing I think that's really big is that fear of judgment. And I'm going to say this by saying that I think society in general has been judging mothers since the beginning of time. I don't think that's anything new. My mom tells stories of my aunt telling her, 30 years ago, that she didn't raise her children because she worked. So there's been that judgment forever and a day. But I think in today's day, it goes even beyond that. And we worry about, I'm sure you've heard stories of, parents who've had police show up at their door because their kids were playing alone in a park. Or, I've had teachers send a note home because there was an unhealthy treat in my kid's lunch. And they will send notes home to say that, you judging the lunch I packed my kids. And that's, I think we're afraid of that, and we're always trying to step ahead of that and trying to put ourselves in this perfect moment um, where we are viewed as okay or good enough. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to pick up a piece of paper right now and read some quotes of things that have been written about me as a mother online. As you know, I write articles, and some of the comments that show up under my articles are horrific. And I have to remind myself that it's not a reflection of who I am as a parent, but these are some things that have been said to me. I've always enjoyed Natalie's articles on how not to raise children. Excellent cautionary tales. Another thing that was written about me, this was an article that I wrote about my son struggling with math and my reaction to a failed math test. And it wasn't the best. It was not my finest parenting moment, but I'm pretty real in my writing about not having it all figured out and being real. So someone wrote, my mom didn't yell at me. She made up flashcards, lots of flashcards, and she flashed them. Mom had more time to spend with me on account she didn't spend half her day writing blogs. Thanks, Mom. I wrote an article questioning why a mother's financial contribution to the family wasn't as valued as a father's financial contribution. Fathers aren't judged for going out to work. It's just expected that they're going to go out to work and they're going to provide. And women are judged for going out to work, but nobody, I find society isn't looking at it and saying, hey, you're contributing to the financial security of your family as well. And there can be a plus to that. So a comment on that article was, mothers should stay home and raise their kids. It's biology. Men provide, women procreate. When you are reading and hearing that thrown at you all the time, it is very overwhelming. And I feel like our society has become that kind of judgmental. I think a good or really important thing to kind of touch on is overachieving kids. And I actually titled this Overachieving Kids, but I think it actually might be better to say overachieving parents. Our kids are expected to be in extracurricular activities from pretty much the day they're born. There's mom and baby yoga and mom and baby swimming, and those things are phenomenal. And I will say I did mom and baby story times at the library. I went to every single, we had, when my kids were little, there was twice a week library times that worked with my schedule, and I went to all of them. I went to mom and baby yoga. I did mom and baby swimming. And for me at that stage in my parenting journey, it was life-saving. I was the first person in my social circle to have children. I had nobody else. I had no other mothers in my age group who had children of my age. And when I went to those things, I met other mothers. And sometimes it was just getting out of the house and talking to somebody else who had not had sleep and who was getting pooped on and peed on and had no contact with other adults besides those days. And those were absolutely life-saving. But as my kids got older, what I found was the pressure to have my kids in every single activity became more demanding and more expensive with every year. I think my kids are into athletics, and even from that perspective, when I signed my kids up to soccer, I expected a soccer practice and a soccer game and to go once a week. My son's soccer club trains like grown men. They train these boys like grown men. They are playing often 7 days a week. They spend weekends traveling to different cities. He plays at a higher level, and we have the opportunity, we did have the opportunity to keep him at a lower level. But what I found is that I had, soccer happens to be with my son, the thing that he's good at. And parents didn't want him to play on their team. So they would ask the coach to sit him because he scored too many goals. They would ask, for him to play less time and things like that. So we put him up at this upper level. And then it took over our lives. And that's not the only thing that happens with. You know, my daughter's swim club practices 4 days a week. At 8 years old, parents were expected to volunteer a minimum of 15 hours a week. And those minimum volunteer hours went up to, at the highest level, at the highest age, at the oldest age group, to 100 hours of volunteer time a month. I don't have 100 hours to volunteer a month in that, so we had to leave it. If you don't have the time to volunteer, you have the option to buy those out, but those are so expensive. And so when I think about that, I think about the pressure that puts on parents, because it's not just the time commitment, but it's also the expense of what these things can cost people, and it's a lot of money. But here's the thing, the pressure gets to parents because we kind of operate under the function that that's what's going to help our children succeed. I work in my day job in HR. I have spent the last almost 10 years working with early talent. So I do a lot of early talent development. I work with students coming out of college and university programs and going into internships and co-ops and those types of things. I volunteer giving talks specifically to women in primarily male focused environments. So I do a lot of sessions and talks for women in engineering and women in STEM and women in tech, where I do some resume critiquing and some interview preps and those types of things. And what I've seen through hiring, I have probably hired thousands of students into these roles over the last few years, and the expectations on these students are high. I worry, to be honest with you, when my kids hit that age, what it's going to look like for them. When I was in university, I went to university and I worked a job, and that was good. And we could do that. And I worked part-time and went to school, and I did well. University students now are expected to maintain very high grades. They're heading up their university clubs. They're expected to open own businesses and start their own websites and be on the varsity sports teams. And it is a lot. And the competition to get into some of these positions when they come out is very overwhelming. And I've had, which is why I kind of work with some of these students to help prepare them for those interviews and for those spaces so that it can become less overwhelming and very demanding. But as a mother, when I look at that, there are times that takes over, and I worry that maybe, am I prepping my kids for this? Am I giving them the things that they should have? And as mothers, we take that on. And that can be really overwhelming for a mother. Let's see if it changes. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about work life. So these are some stats. In 2019, Canadian women 15 and older represented nearly half of the labor force, compared to 37% in 1976. So that's a pretty big increase. If you think of over half of Canadian women over the age of 15 participate in the labor force, and these are again from StatScan, and I have the sources in the slides if you'd like them. And in 2014, 69% of couple families with at least one child under 16 were dual earner families, and that was up 36% from 1976. Among dual earner families, almost 3/4 had two parents who are working full time. So that shows you that most homes today have two working parents. I think even if you look at today's economic status, it can be really, really tricky and hard to raise a family on one income. Look at home prices today. You know, a young couple who are just starting out and starting their children, it must be terribly difficult to kind of get into home ownership market in today, especially on one income. But I think aside from the financial obligation to that, I think we're also moving away from the narrative that women's main goal in life is to become a mother. And we're looking at the fact that I work definitely to contribute to my family's financial stability, but I also work because I like it. I work because I really like my job, and I like having an impact, and I like working with early talent. I like career counseling, and I like helping young people find their place in the world, and having just playing this tiny little smart part in that brings me joy. And I think we're, as a society, starting to, I hope, come to that understanding that that is a part of that for women, and we're not just looking at it as a means to an end. So I put these in here because I feel like the photo on the left is what people think of when they think working from home, and a photo on the right is really what it looks like today. So working from home, the work world has changed, right? We all can see that, I think, especially right now in the pandemic. The work world has changed in the last decade, 2 decades. So hours worked is a huge change. When you think, the standard work week is 40 hours a week. Most people I know clock in more than 40 hours a week. That has become almost the standard. I think when I think about the commute, I think that is something that the pandemic is changing. And I hope to see that continue. In 2019, the Toronto Star reported that the average commute time in Toronto was 42 minutes. That adds, in an ideal state, that adds almost 2 hours to your day, not including your work time, right? So if we can maintain this environment where we're able to work from different places and understand that you can still get that productive outcome, I think that is going to really help families, and I think specifically mothers. It will really kind of help that. I think remote work options have been life-changing for mothers. I don't have enough good things to say about what a weight is lifted off my shoulders. I work in a remote environment now. Pre-COVID, my company had a lot of flexibility, and I would usually work a couple of days from home and a couple of days in an office. And that weight of not panicking if my child wakes up with a fever or if there's a snow day and there's no school was amazing. I think back to my mother tells a story often when both me and my brother had chicken pox, and she didn't have the flexibility to work from home then. The technology didn't allow for that. But her boss had her come in and work in the evening. When my dad came home from work, she went in and worked until midnight in the office getting her work done, and then had to come home, finish up the house stuff, go to bed, and wake up in the morning to take care of 2 children with chicken pox. So that I don't have that pressure. I don't have that because I know I can be home if needs be. Having said that, there are drawbacks, and it can also be very difficult to balance working from home and still caring for your kids. So I'm sure we've all kind of experienced having a sick child and balancing taking phone calls and checking fevers and making soups and cleaning up vomit when your kids are sick, and you're doing that all at the same time, is a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And you can often find yourself in that environment feeling very flustered and feeling like you're juggling all of the things and doing none of them well. And I find myself in that position all the time, where I feel fortunate that I have the ability to do all of these things, but I'm not entirely convinced I'm doing all of them 100%, because you can't do all of those things 100% at the same time. The remote work options, it brings with it some responsibility, I guess, or some tricky parts to it when you think you're expected to be connected at all times in some cases. So yes, I can take an hour and take my kid to the dentist if I need to in the middle of the day, but that means if an urgent email comes in at 9 o'clock at night, I'm often expected to answer that. Or, companies have become quite a bit more flexible, and we are shifting away from that philosophy of bums in seats. So I think, a decade ago, or I think about 20 years ago when I graduated university and started working, and I think about the idea that you were expected to go into your office and sit at your desk for 8 hours a day and take your 1 hour lunch, and that was your expectation. And when you did those things, you were looked at as being productive. That narrative is shifting. And now we're looking at the output of your work you're doing as opposed to the hours of the work that you're taking. So the tech company that I work for actually has, the CEO of the company actually has a theory where he thinks that you have 4 good productive hours a day. And that's it. So, and I think that's really important to see that we're starting to shift with that. So if you're, if you're more productive getting your kids to school in the morning and working after dinner once your kids have, wound down and gone to bed, a lot of companies are starting to allow for that flexibility. So there's definitely the plus with that. From my perspective, working at home right now, 100% at home, especially during the pandemic, the strain that can leave on me is that I never actually leave work. I never walk away from work. My work is always there and it always feels like I'm on. And I go from work being on to parenting back to work, and I never have a disconnect and I never have a break with that. And that can be really draining. So I think there's high expectations on mothers specifically when it comes to this. And that's something that I think is really key too in today's world. Our household responsibilities are divided more than ever, but mothers still take on the majority of the share. Women still take on more unpaid work than men. There is, and I've provided a link to the report in the slide deck to this. But across the world, women perform more than 3/4 of unpaid cared work, including looking after children, spouses, partners, or other family members. That's 76% of the unpaid work that's happening is happening by mothers. And when you factor in the fact that most mothers are also working, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. And in this report that you can pull up, let me think if I have that there. Women on average are spending at minimum 20 hours a week on additional unpaid work in the home, which is like a part-time job on top of your full-time job, which is a lot. I think about the things that the expectations that are put on mothers in terms of kids' schedules, putting together extracurricular activities, making the doctor's appointment, the school, anything to do with schools typically fall on mothers, whether that be homework or parent-teachers conferences. Our school only calls me. I don't know if folks have seen the interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who famously said when the school called her that this child has 2 parents and you can rotate and call their father. I often ask when my kids' teachers or my kids' school calls, I often say, do you have their father's number on file? Because they always call me. And oftentimes I will say pre-COVID, when I would go on business trips, I would always comment, sometimes they'd call when I'm on a business trip and they'd ask me to come pick up my child because, and I'd always say, you have the child's father's number on file. Can you call him because I'm out of the country? And it was always met with a little bit of shock or a little bit of, oh, okay, I can do that. And I often wondered why it was always me that was called first, but it always is. And that responsibility tends to fall. Family responsibilities often still fall on the mother. So care, whether that be care for parents, holiday planning, gift shopping, clothes shopping for the kids. I have an amazingly supportive husband. I don't think my husband has ever shopped for a Christmas gift. I don't think my husband has ever shopped for clothing for my kids. I don't think I shop for birthday presents, including for his mother. I take care of all of that. I don't think my husband knows when doctor's appointments are due or, all of those things. He will happily drive them. He will happily be there. But I'm the one ultimately who holds the expectation to do those things. And we work the same amount of time. In fact, right now, the way our roles are, my My job is a little bit more intensive than his, and I'm still expected to do all of those things. Anecdotally, I recently, just last week, called to make an eye doctor appointment for my kids. And while booking that appointment, my husband was kind of in the background and said, oh, I need an appointment too, and I booked his. And at the end of that, the receptionist said, it's been 2 years since you've had an appointment. I think we should consider making you an appointment, but I won't be able to book you in right now because you have to be available to help your daughter pick out her glasses while your husband's at his appointment. So I still came in last. And I think that's just the norm. That's just somehow that has not shifted. And I really hope that in the next years that we can somehow shift that. I think we've done really well, but I think we still have far to go, because I really am hoping by the time my daughter has children that has changed. I want to read this quote because this quote really, really has an impact on me, and I'll read it, and it's on the screen, but it's from Glennon Doyle in the book Untamed, which is a wonderful book. But it says, mothers have martyred themselves in their children's names since the beginning of time. We have lived as if she who disappears the most loves the most. We have been conditioned to prove our love by slowly ceasing to exist. What a terrible burden for children to bear, to know that they are the reason their mother stopped living. What a terrible burden for our daughters to bear, to know that if they choose to become mothers, this will be their fate too. Because if we show them that being a martyr is the highest form of love, that is what they will become. They will feel obligated to love as well as their mothers loved, after all. They will believe they have permission to live only as fully as their mothers allowed themselves to live. If we keep passing down the legacy of martyrdom to our daughters, with whom does it end? Which woman ever gets to live? And when does the death sentence begin? At the wedding altar? In the delivery room? Whose delivery room? Our children's or our own? When we call martyrdom love, we teach our children that when love begins, life ends. That to me is a quote that really, it sits with heavy with me, it impacts me, and it fuels me to not let my life stop because I have children. And my children see it. And my children, I hope by seeing me follow my dreams, that becomes their norm for both my daughter and my son. To kind of end off, I'll talk a little bit. I know we've talked a bit about the pandemic, but let's talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted women, especially in the work world. If you look at this stat between February, and this is from the Canadian Thought Leadership at rbc.com, a report that they put together. Between February and October 20th, or of 2020, 20,600 women fell out of the labor force, even as 68,000 more men joined it. In the US, if we look at some reports in the US, and there's a link there, in the month of December of 2020, women accounted for 100% of jobs lost. 100% of the jobs lost in December were women. That should be disturbing to all of us. And there's so many reasons behind that. We talked about the expectations on mothers in the work world. We talked about all of those things. But here's some things that really kind of lay into that. Things like lack of flexibility at work, feeling like they need to be available to work at all hours. So I talked about being always on. The housework and caregiving burdens due to COVID. Worrying that their performance is being negatively judged because of caregiving responsibilities during the pandemic. I'm in HR. I have those conversations on a daily basis with women at work. There's some discomfort sharing the challenges they're facing with teammates or managers. I know when I entered the work world, I was told when interviewing not to mention if I have children. And that is so disappointing to hear that we don't live in a world where we can own having children. I hope that that's changing. I feel a little bit that I live in a bit of a dream space because I do work for a very progressive company who does not make us feel like that at all. But I know that that's not the whole world. Another reason that's listed as women kind of exiting the workforce with feeling blindsided by decisions that affect their day-to-day work, and feeling unable to bring their whole self to work. And these are all impacts from the pandemic. I think it's pretty astounding. When we think about kind of the responsibilities that fall on women, mothers are more than 3 times as likely as fathers to be responsible for most of the housework and caregiving. In fact, they're 1.5 times more likely than fathers to be spending an extra 3 or more hours a day on housework and childcare, which is equivalent to 20 hours a week or half a full-time job. I mentioned earlier, women tend to be the default when it comes to school. And one survey that was actually done through YMC, one of the sites that I work for, by Erica M, said out of 700 moms who responded, only 7% described their COVID state of mind as doing well. 7% of moms say they're okay right now. So we're not okay. So I think that is also really astounding. The stress of managing physical health, mental health, school, screen time is becoming a heavy burden to mothers during the pandemic. When you think about the natural things like kids popping into video calls, that can be a big stress. Like I said, I worked for a very progressive company where at the very beginning of the pandemic, when we went home, our senior leadership actually called out, don't feel the need to hide your children. If your kids come into a call, it's okay. We use an internal messaging system at work, and parents will often put in their status that they're not available right now because they're parenting. So they will put, I'm away, and it's acceptable. Not every company has that. And there is still a pressure of, I know they've said this, but I'm struggling when my kids pop into a call. I am struggling when my kids need help with school and I'm trying to have a conversation. And sometimes it's not as simple as just as kids popping in. I have stressed that, people at work can hear my tweens fighting. Life isn't always perfect and they're not all babies. And sometimes my kids are fighting loud in the background. Monday, I had to exit a call early because my kids were fighting over snacks in the kitchen. And I actually had to log out of a meeting because of it. So I think that's really important. The other part is messy houses. I mean, our houses are messy, right? And that can put a lot of pressure when you're on Zoom calls all day that people can see in the background that like, I got toys all over the place and like, I've got a pile of towels that need to be put away back there. So I think that's really important. And my battery of my laptop's dying. So while we're talking, I'm running upstairs to plug this in, but we can keep going. This is multitasking. So what can we do? So a big thing that we can do to help parents right now is to keep childcare and schools open. Not only is this good for our kids, but we need it. We need it because we can't keep going and balancing both. So I think that's a really important thing, is to make sure that our schools and our childcare centers stay open. I think companies need to step up. Companies need to offer, oh dear, can we see? Can we see? I plugged my thing in and now it all went away. Companies need to offer flexible working arrangements. We need to provide training on allyship and support and how we can support our mothers and parents in general. But we need to train our managers on how to support our parents and what their problems are. And so I think those are some key things that companies and people can do to help kind of support in this crazy time.
On behalf of CFUW-Georgetown and the Halton Hills Public Library, thank you very much, Natalie, for joining us tonight. This has been a great look into the issues of modern parenting, from social media to the educational pressures, in addition to the pandemic. So thank you very much. At this time, I ask that CFUW members stay on the call. Your business meeting will begin momentarily. So just one more time, I want to thank Natalie again for joining us, and to everyone else in the audience as well. and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.